Welcome to episode 235 of Build Your House Yourself University by BYHYU. I'm your host and fellow student, Michelle Nelson, and together we'll learn the basics of home design and construction and demystify the building process so we can make informed decisions and build quality dream homes with or without a general contractor. This week and next, we'll have a fireplace professional and educator on the show who will help us understand the different types of fireplaces and educate us about some fireplace misconceptions. We'll also talk about his favorite type of fireplaces and the greatest piece of advice he has for consumers. In part one of our talk, he'll focus on breaking down the major categories of fireplaces. It's a great interview, so let's get right into it.
My name's Jake Cromwell. I own a company in Northwest Arkansas called Top Hat Chimney and Roofing. For a little over 22 years, I either worked for or owned this company and kind of became a super geek about fireplaces early in my career. It was just a personal passion. I really enjoyed the work, and I enjoyed being one of the few people who knew anything about them. So it wasn't hard to be an expert in a field where there wasn't a lot of experts early. But
right.
At this point in my career, I've become an educator for the Chimney Safety Institute of America, which is the premier certification and education institute for chimney professionals in North America. I also spend time as a consultant to other chimney companies on developing installation and sales teams, basically teaching them how to inspect chimneys.
Well, I'm so glad that you're with us today and that you're going to teach us a little bit about what we should be looking for in a fireplace when we select them for our new homes. Let's just start kind of with the basics. Let's talk about the different types of fireplaces and the pros and cons of each. So first, just list out 1, 2, 3, or however many, the basic kinds, and then we'll talk about each one of them.
So as you can imagine, there's an incredible variety of different types of fireplaces. But one of the best ways to break it down into an easy way to understand it is that there's basically 2 different types. We can certainly get more complex, but if I were training a chimney inspector or a chimney installer or professional to understand what they're going to see, or what you as a homeowner should understand whenever you're looking at a new home, or what you as a just general consumer should understand, all of them are basically ways of putting a 900 to 1400 degree fire in the middle of a wood structure.
Wow.
It's typically an unwise thing to do.
Right.
So that's the perspective I want everyone to have when you look at a fireplace. Is I'm building a very, very hot, large fire in the middle of my most prized wooden structure. So there's a lot to consider. But the 2 types, generally speaking, are masonry and factory built. And the way to understand that is factory built, as the name suggests, is that it's built in a factory. In North America and in just about everywhere in the world, for you to sell something like a dishwasher or an iPad or anything that has an amount of risk with it, it utilizes electricity or it utilizes high heat or it has some amount of risk involved, we have to test those things. In America, especially, and I'm just going to speak for the rest of the time here with respect to North America, though most of the world is the same way. Those factory-built systems are engineered and tested and approved, similar to medical devices. We can't just decide we're going to make a new heart valve and stick it out there for the world to use. It has to be tested and approved. And so we have the same with fireplaces for factory-built fireplaces. So factory-built fireplaces go through an engineering and testing procedure, which means it's extremely important. We'll get to this a little bit more later, I hope. It's extremely important that factory-built fireplaces are only used very specifically as how it's indicated to be used from the manufacturer, because that's the only way they tested to see that it was effective. It's extremely important and incumbent upon a homeowner or a user to only use a factory-built fireplace precisely as it's described to be used in the instruction manual. And I'm sure everyone has seen a little UL or tested and listed on the tag of your dishwasher or on your iPhone. That indicates that it has been tested and approved by some agency that is responsible for doing that. When they test them in a very small set of circumstances. They're generally sort of the ideal circumstances. To deviate from those situations or sets of circumstances puts you as a user at risk. So the other kind of fireplace is a masonry fireplace. Now, it has a similar standard that it's constructed to, but we also call them site-built masonry fireplaces because they're sort of they're allowed, and I say allowed, generally permitted by codes and standards to be designed and built on site according to a looser set of standards and codes, so that a certain amount of, say, masonry has to exist on the sides and in the front and in the rear and underneath, and the distance between the fireplace inside and combustible pieces of the house is so far and so many inches with so many different types of materials. Those systems give some flexibility for builders, and obviously we've had those for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The codes, however, have modified and gotten better and better over time. So those codes and standards have improved, especially in the 20th century. We saw a gigantic increase in North America in the codes and standards required and utilized for site-built masonry fireplaces. Now, similar to factory-built systems, the components, say a fire brick or a brick or a grate or an inspection door or ash cleanout door, these little pieces that compose a masonry fireplace, those are fabricated by standards. Most codes and standards require that a site-built masonry fireplace is composed of, say, fire brick that conforms to an ASTM standard. So even though the whole entire design may not be standardized to the point that factory-built fireplaces are so precisely, each component is. The standard for construction is relatively precise with respect to other trades. My point in all of this and understanding is that if you try to modify a factory-built fireplace in the way that you might modify a masonry fireplace, you can get into a lot of crazy heavy risk because, as you can imagine, in any marketplace, they're kind of built to minimum standards often, and they're not exactly responsible for what happens if you use it outside of the way they describe it. So we take a lot of risks there.
Okay, but it sounds like if we use them as designed, we are safe with either a masonry or a factory-built fireplace. Is it correct?
That word safe always gives me a lot of hesitation. I don't mean to be funny. It's just, like I said in the very beginning, anytime you put a fire in a house, it is inherently unsafe.
Okay.
In terms of minimizing risk, the best you can do with a fireplace is, yes, like you said, use it exactly as it's described in the manual. With a masonry fireplace, there is a standard in the National Fire Protection Association called NFPA 211. That's what a fireman or a chimney sweep or anyone would inspect a fireplace to. It's a standard by which they would address a fireplace. The requirement is that it's inspected annually because it goes under so many different types of changes just naturally from weather or perhaps seismic problems or use or abuse. And if it's not inspected periodically, to say the least, then one can't really know what types of risks they're taking. That inspection often is required that you use a camera to inspect the interior of it.
Oh, wow.
So, right. Yeah. And a lot of people don't know this stuff. And I would say well over 99% of the public does not know about what's required of them by the codes and standards to utilize their fireplace properly.
Yeah. But it seems like just from talking to folks, most people are choosing, and it seems like I think it's probably easier for the builders to choose a factory-built fireplace. That seems to be the most popular by far. By far. I would say since 1985 to 1990. In the early 80s, factory-built fireplaces were really introduced heavily. They've certainly been around for a lot longer, since I believe the 60s, maybe even the 50s. But they started really increasing in popularity when at the heart of how they marketed them was that they were easy to install. So if you had to have a master mason and 20 to 30,000 pounds of masonry delivered to a site and a foundation poured, so many considerations for a properly built masonry fireplace, which, by the way, in my 23 years, I've never seen. Wow. If it hasn't already been repaired by a chimney professional or a mason who understands what they're doing, I've never once ever seen a properly installed masonry fireplace. And that's tens of thousands of fireplaces. Wow, that's pretty telling. And it's not a difficult standard. There's a really interesting history there if you want to go on a rabbit hole real quick. The properly built masonry chimney that should have come from Europe as the colonies were settling was being developed. There was a gentleman, Count Rumsford, that had kind of developed that technology and was helping to bring it into architecture in North America, was a loyalist. And after the American Revolution, the British loyalists left and they took a lot of what they were bringing over here before with them. And he was one of them. So North America largely developed its own standard for fireplaces that wasn't really with respect to the history and architecture that it should have come with Europe.
Consequently, the real revolution in fireplaces in North America, the great things that we did do was the development of wood stoves, as you may or may not know about by Ben Franklin. So it's the third type of fireplace I would mention is a freestanding factory-built appliance like a wood stove.
Actually, I didn't know that Ben Franklin invented the wood stove. So
I don't think he invented it. I think he really just. I need to get that straight before I start teaching that. And I think he made some technological modifications that improved it.
Okay.
And he was right in realizing that it was much wiser to build something out of steel in the middle of your room that could radiate 360 degrees to provide heat, as opposed to a masonry structure that you had to keep going for a very long time to get a heat benefit out of it. And in fact, it's generally exhausting most of the heat from your home via the chimney. Masonry fireplaces are generally extremely inefficient for heat.
Let's concentrate our talk today on factory-built fireplaces, since that's what most people will use. I feel like it might be just a little bit safer since someone has engineered it and tested, as long as it's used as it's designed. I know that there are, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have vented or direct vent fireplaces, and we have ventless fireplaces. Tell me about each one of those, the pros and cons of each.
There's a broader category that should be mentioned before you get into vented or unvented.
Yes.
The broader category is fuel type.
So, okay, yes, please.
So there's wood burning fireplaces, and then there's natural gas fireplaces, there's liquid propane fireplaces, and then there are pellet fireplaces. We'll exclude pellet here for the moment because most of those generally should be just considered heating appliances. I'll put it this way. You don't see a lot of pellet fireplaces. And if we're talking about, as your podcast does, building a new home or building your own home or making modifications or repairs to your home, and fireplaces, open fireplaces like you would have installed in a wall, 99% of those are going to be wood or gas.
Okay, yeah.
So we'll exclude propane and pellet for the moment. Typically, the first thing we want to identify is the type of fuel that's being used and that the appliance was designed and engineered to be used for. Because the burning characteristics of natural gas versus wood are extremely different. So to use, and that's a quick little warning and thing to offer here is that if you were to burn wood in an appliance that's only designed to be burned natural gas, that's an extremely risky thing to do. As you can imagine, putting jet fuel in your Prius is a bad idea. Yeah,
so let's talk a little bit more about those. The pros and cons of each and what you prefer.
Well, the first thing I always ask a consumer, I prefer open masonry wood burning because of the feel and the smell and the history of it. So in a factory-built fireplace, the first thing we ask a consumer is, what are they trying to achieve? If you really want to get significant heat or secondary heat into the home, there's a couple ways to go about that. If you're looking to add ambiance or design elements or aesthetics to a room, there's other ways to approach that. If you just have a blank spot on a wall that you don't know what to do with, or you need something just to accent the television, there's a lot of ways to do that. With that said, if you're a homeowner and you want to add a fireplace, let's say like you're going through it now, you want to add a fireplace to your great room or your centerpiece room, and you want it to be just stunning. You want it to be beautiful, and it needs to deliver some heat. I would recommend one of two types. If you want to burn wood, which comes with a little mess because you have to bring wood in and carry ashes out. And sometimes they can draft differently and you can end up with a smell that's a little scary. So if you wanted heat and you wanted design, I would send you to a hearth store, or I would send you to a professional like myself who could give you lots of options for either a high efficiency or low efficiency wood burner. Typically what you see in most houses these days are what we call builder's boxes. It looks like a sheet metal factory built fireplace. If you've seen one, you've seen 100,000 of them. If you're a construction or building or design enthusiast, it looks like a sheet metal construction fireplace. They're extremely inefficient. Most of the heat they generate goes right up the chimney, and that's by design. By design, they don't want heat to transfer from the firebox to the adjacent walls. And the brilliance of the design, if there is any, is that it was designed so that anybody could install it. A framer, a plumber, a builder, an assistant. Basically, it installs right into the wall. Now, there are some very strict requirements that are often ignored, even though it's very simple to install. And those requirements generally are a 2-inch clearance at minimum to combustibles. Not difficult to achieve. If you can imagine the way your dishwasher is installed, all of its clearances are met by just installing it because it has sort of a shield around it that keeps it away from anything that it might touch. These fireplaces aren't that way. They don't always have a protection devices around them, but they do just kind of insert into a wall and then you frame around it and then sheetrock right up next to it.
And what is this type of fireplace? Is what kind that you're talking about, Jake?
This is a factory-built fireplace, low efficiency, open front, typically called a builder's box.
Okay.
They're inexpensive. The price on them can range anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 for all of it, which is extremely inexpensive compared to a masonry fireplace, which could cost you $20,000 to $100,000 to have built. So you can see the attractiveness to builders, especially in subdivisions where finding profitability is about finding efficiency in your materials and your time. And that's really what they did here is they found a way to put a fireplace, which can add $20,000 to $100,000 of value to the home for an extremely low cost of parts and labor to install. These are sold by the truckload. There's so many of them out there. I would not ever consider them a way to heat your home. They won't do that. The amount of heat they'll put out is perhaps significant if you're sitting in front of it or if you're standing in front of it. But the amount of warm air from your home that you've already conditioned with your primary heating system that's being exhausted through that fireplace will overcome the amount of net heat you provide to the home. So they're not a great heater. Those fireplaces can have a gas log set. We see this, you probably see this as well. Extremely commonly, you see a gas log set that's installed in there. Some of those units are approved for gas and wood. Some of them are approved for gas only, just the gas log set. Some of them, as you mentioned, are unvented, or as some of us professionals like to call them, lung vented, because anyone who's, and I might actually anger some professionals here who install lots of these. There's lots of them still being sold.
We want the truth, Jake, so tell us. It's fine.
I've investigated multiple deaths because of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Word.
It happens. And sometimes they didn't even know that was the cause of why someone died. The most recent case for me was I came just to inspect a chimney after a person died, and I discovered that their chimney had been leaking carbon monoxide badly for a very long time throughout the whole home. And we were all very concerned that probably contributed largely to his death. So those are very serious problems and concerns to have. Let me just go ahead and jump this in here real quick. If you are looking to have a fireplace installed, you must involve a professional. I would say the same thing if you're going to have your knee surgery done or a tooth removed. Don't let your cousin do it. You need to get a professional, someone who knows how to do that. It's not really an esoteric set of skills or knowledge, but the things that a professional can see immediately would take you years to understand as a layman. But that said, back to the subject, an open factory-built builder's box is extremely inefficient and extremely cost-effective to adding a fireplace to a room. Along a sort of continuum or spectrum of those fireplaces, going from a non-vented builder's box to a vented builder's box to perhaps a builder's box that's vented and also approved for gas and wood, you might get into a medium or high efficiency builder's box or a medium or high efficiency factory-built fireplace. And these are easy to identify if you notice that they have a heavy steel framed glass door on the front that seals and locks it all the way tight. So if you see a fireplace that has that, and not to be mistaken with a wood stove insert that often gets put into a fireplace, if you see a heavy steel glass door on the front, that means that it contains that heat and it controls the amount of air that comes in and goes out very efficiently. And you can deliver a lot of heat from those. You can actually put heat exchangers off of those like you would off of a furnace where air is blown around the fireplace and delivered to rooms via fans. You can get significant heat out of those. They're certainly more expensive, much easy, or not that much more difficult to install. So I really like those. If you're going to be in the factory-built fireplace world, I would really like to see a high-efficiency unit. They're extremely safe. They're extremely easy to install. They're just a little more expensive, and they actually deliver substantial heat to the house.
And so to be clear, you say steel and glass. So I know this may seem very basic, but you're saying like maybe the outline of it is made with a heavy steel and then the viewing area is primarily made of glass, but it's sealed. That firebox is sealed in with that steel framing and then the glass front.
No, the door.
The door.
Everything else will seem like a regular factory-built fireplace, but will be a heavy steel frame construction.
Okay.
Because it has to have a locking mechanism that really seals out the ambient air in the room.
Okay.
And the purpose of that, to have a heavy glass and steel frame door on the front of the fireplace, is to control the combustion air that enters the fireplace which also will control the ventilation air that leaves the fireplace. And that's how we achieve those high efficiencies, is having that kind of control. Generally speaking, you have factory-built fireplaces that are open, vented or non-vented, gas, wood, or gas and wood. Mm-hmm. And then you also have high efficiency versions of that for wood. Now, the last one, and the one that I would recommend for a lot of your viewers who don't want the headache and mess of wood, they do want to get some heat out of it, and they want it to be beautiful, and they don't want to have to maintenance it frequently, and they don't mind spending a little more to have something that's going to really add value and function to your home. That's called a direct vent fireplace. And a direct vent, similar to what we were just now talking about with a high efficiency wood burning fireplace, it's a high efficiency gas burning fireplace.
Okay.
And so it has a sealed off front. There's a glass front. You probably never have to open it or clean it. A professional might have to do that 4 or 5 times over a decade, to have someone out just to maintenance it or clean it, or just to make sure everything's working okay. And that is recommended, often required for warranties and for code compliance. But they have a sealed front, and there's looks like a gas log set in there. They often get mistaken as regular fireplaces with gas logs in them, because that's kind of what it looks like. But they have just a 3-inch chimney and a 3-inch air intake. They're extremely small compared to what you would have in other situations with open fireplaces. And because those are small, just like in the wood burning fireplace we just described, we control the amount of air that comes in, and we control the amount of air that goes out, and we get optimal heat capture by doing that. Instead of exhausting a massive amount of heat, we can actually transfer that heat or radiate that heat, or sometimes convey that heat into the room. That's because we have control of that intake and output air. And so those are called direct vent. That's the optimal, that's really the operational word there.
And so those 3-inch, did you call them chimneys? 3-inch?
I said chimneys, pipes, just to keep it clear, but it's
kind
a
of
vent.
Like pipe, look like a vent.
Right.
Okay, all right. So that's not seen by us. That would be something that the installer would do kind of behind the wall, and then they would go through either the roof or the wall to get air in and out.
That's exactly right. So there's 2 types of vents for direct vent. One that we call a coaxial, and that's a pipe inside of a pipe. So it's like a 3-inch pipe inside of a 6-inch pipe. And that air intake would come in the outer pipe, and the exhaust would go on the inner pipe.
Okay.
Then you also have a collinear, which is just 2 3-inch or 2 4-inch, or a 3-inch and a 4-inch in some cases. But generally you have 2 pipes right next to each other. And those pipes will go out the top or the rear of the fireplace, and then they'll go right behind the fireplace, out of a wall. You'll see that if you're ever looking for a home, if you see what looks like a great big metal dryer vent hood behind the fireplace, that's an indicator that you have a direct vent fireplace, because it does get really hot, that vent. There are a lot of rules about how to install those, because they do produce a lot of heat. They'll melt siding, they'll melt soffit. You need to be very careful about that.
Okay. And is there a reason to choose a coaxial versus a collinear, did you say?
There's one reason, and that's the manufacturer requires it in their manual. That's one thing I always come back to is they will tell you whatever you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to use it. It will be clearly indicated in that instruction manual.
That was part 1 of my interview with Jake Cromwell of Top Hat Chimney and Roofing. Special thanks to him for all the great information he gave us. In a couple of weeks, we'll have the second part of the interview, where Jake will tell us more about direct vent fireplaces, what we need to look for if we want to mount our TV above our fireplace, and where we can find certified fireplace professionals like himself. Make sure you follow us or subscribe to the podcast so the next episode will automatically be downloaded to your podcast library as soon as it's released. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned as much as I did. And I hope you'll join me again next time for the next episode of Build Your House Yourself University by BYHYU. Please remember that the purpose of this podcast is simply to educate and inform. It's not a substitute for professional advice. The information that you hear is based only on the opinions, research, and experiences of my guests and myself. That information might be incomplete, it's subject to change, and it may not apply to your project. In addition, building codes and requirements vary from region to region, so always consult a professional about specific recommendations for your home.